追责中共。美国会共和党领袖，美中关系回不去了。
Blame the CCP. Republican leader says U.S.-China ties are dead 2020.
年3月28日，李义华美国国会众议院外交事务委员会首席共和党议员迈克尔·麦考尔
Republican Michael McCaul, RTX.
星期五3月27日致函美国国务院，表示支持其打击中国共产党散播有关新冠病毒谣言的努力。麦考尔在信中还敦促国务卿蓬佩奥考虑采取更多行动，包括与其他民主国家一同对北京当局掩盖新冠病毒的行为展开多边调查。整起事件将让美国人清醒地审视我们和中国的关系。麦考尔星期五对美国之音说。
Republican Michael McCaul, RTX, the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, wrote to the State Department Friday, March 27. Google said it supports its efforts to crack down on the Chinese Communist Party for spreading rumors about the new coronavirus. In the letter, McCaul also urged Secretary of State Pompeo to consider doing more, including joining other democracies in a multilateral investigation into Beijing's cover-up of the new coronavirus. The whole incident will give Americans a sobering look at our relationship with China, McCaul told The Voice of America on Friday.
全球新冠病毒疫情继续延烧，美国新冠病毒确诊人数仍朝着不断恶化的方向急速发展。根据美国约翰霍普金斯大学的实时统计数据显示，截至星期五下午5时，美国确诊病例已突破10万，死亡人数达到1400多人。
As the global outbreak of new coronavirus continues to spread, the number of confirmed cases of new coronavirus in the United States continues to deteriorate rapidly. By 5 p.m. Friday, the number of confirmed cases in the United States had exceeded 100,000 and the death toll was more than 1,400, according to real-time statistics from the Johns Hopkins University.
麦考尔在信中写道，他同意蓬佩奥称武汉病毒的爆发清楚展示中国共产党对美国的健康和生活方式构成了重大威胁的说法。
McCaul wrote that he agreed with Pompeo that the Wuhan outbreak clearly demonstrates that the Chinese Communist Party poses a major threat to the health and lifestyle of the United States.
借由将当地爆发的疫情造成全球大流行，他们的体制旨在审查任何可能对其政权构成威胁的事物，这正将数百万美国人的生命置于危险之中。麦考尔信中说，中共正在进行一场不实信息的宣传运动，企图将责任推到美国身上。这样的做法正加剧这种可怕的局势。
By creating a global pandemic from a local outbreak, their system is designed to scrutinize anything that could threaten their regime, which is putting 1 million American lives at risk, McCaul wrote. The Communist Party is running a disinformation campaign to try to put the blame on the U.S., which is exacerbating this terrible situation.
美中新冠病毒外交战近日引爆。
A diplomatic war between the U.S. and China over a new coronavirus has broken out.
与新冠病毒疫情有关的美中外交战近日在美国行政、立法机构展开。美国国务卿蓬佩奥星期三指责中共对人民健康和生活方式构成重大威胁，并敦促各国在联合国等国际机构抗击他所说的中共恶意影响。蓬佩奥是在七国集团外长视频会议后发表的这番讲话。这位美国首席外交官的用词一再直指中共。他还说，其他与会国官员都意识到中共为转移注意力和逃避责任而展开的散布不实信息的运动。
The diplomatic war between the United States and China related to the new coronavirus epidemic began recently in the executive and legislative organs of the United States. U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo on Wednesday accused the Communist Party of posing a major threat to people's health and way of life and urged countries to combat what he called its malicious influence in international bodies such as the United Nations. Pompeo was speaking after a video conference of the Group of 7 foreign ministers. The U.S. chief diplomat has repeatedly referred to the Chinese Communist Party. He added that officials from other participating countries were aware of the Communist Party's campaign of misinformation to divert attention and avoid responsibility.
星期二，共和党联邦参议员乔什·霍利
Senator Josh Hawley, RMO,
和同党籍的联邦众议员爱丽丝·斯坦福尼克
Republican Elise Stefanik, RNY,
在参众两院分别提出决议，呼吁对中国共产党新冠病毒疫情爆发初期隐瞒疫情扩散情况启动国际调查，同时要求中国对受影响的世界各国进行赔偿。
On Tuesday, Republican Senator Dio Hawley, Senator Josh Hawley, RMO, and fellow Congressman Elise Republican calls for an international investigation into the Communist Party of China's cover-up of the spread of the new coronavirus at the beginning of the outbreak, and for China to compensate affected countries around the world.
同一天，还有一组跨党派联邦众议员提出另一项决议案，谴责中国政府对新冠病毒爆发的处理，将这场全球流行病归因于中国的谎言和管理不善。该决议案还呼吁北京公开承认新冠病毒起源于中国。
On the same day, a bipartisan group of House members introduced another resolution condemning the Chinese government's handling of the new coronavirus outbreak, attributing the global epidemic to Chinese lies and mismanagement. The resolution also calls for Beijing to publicly acknowledge that the new coronavirus originated in China.
麦考尔星期五在接受美国之音采访时指责，这场颠覆全球秩序的流行病源自中国，而且原本情势是可以避免失控的。
In an interview with VOA Friday, McCall accused China of being the source of an epidemic that upended the global order and could have been prevented from spiraling out of control.
我的调查显示，11月底12月初就知道疫情了。中国有8位医生说出了这件事，他们被中共拘留，不得不撤回声明。其中1名被提出刑事指控，最后死于冠状病毒。同时，世界卫生组织接受了中共的说法，说1月中旬没有人传人。麦考尔说。
My investigation showed that the outbreak was known from late November to early December and that 8 doctors in China had spoken about it. They were detained by the CCP and had to retract their statement. One of them was charged with a crime and died of a coronavirus. Meanwhile, the WHO accepted the CCP's statement that there was no human-to-human transmission in mid-January, McCall said.
当时赶上春节。数以百万计的人前往武汉，500万人离开武汉，去中国其他地方或出国旅行。这就是为什么美国在1月份出现了第一例。本来是可以避免这种情况的，本来是可以制止的，本来是可以控制的。但是，由于中共不说出自己国家发生事情的真相。如今我们要应对全球性的大流行病。
It was the Spring Festival and millions of people were going to Wuhan, and 5 million people were leaving Wuhan to travel to other parts of China or abroad. That's why the US had its first case in January. It could have been avoided, it could have been stopped, it could have been controlled. But now we are dealing with a global pandemic because the party does not tell the truth about what is happening in its own country.
麦考尔议员还对于世界卫生组织在这次新冠疫情中所扮演的角色表示了不信任。
McCall also expressed distrust of the WHO's role in the new crown disease.
世卫组织负责人来自埃塞俄比亚。中国在埃塞俄比亚投了好多钱。埃塞俄比亚首都被称为中国人建造的首都。麦考尔说。所以我不知道。我知道世卫组织有些薄弱，被削弱了，但在是否尽责的问题上，我认为他们这次做得不够好，因此我们不会给他们一张好的成绩单。
the head of who is from Ethiopia, where China has invested a lot of money, and the Ethiopian capital is known as the Chinese-built capital, McCall said. So I don't know. I know World Health Organization is weak and weakened, but I don't think they did a good enough job this time, so we're not going to give them a good report card.
美国总统特朗普星期五签署了一项超过2万亿美元的援助计划，将帮助公司和个人应对由于新型冠状病毒引起的经济衰退，并向医院提供急需的医疗用品。这项援助计划为美国有史以来最大规模的经济纾困法案。
U.S. President Donald Trump on Friday signed a more than $2 trillion aid package that will help companies and individuals cope with the COVID-19 recession and provide much-needed medical supplies to hospitals. The bailout is the largest economic rescue bill in U.S. history.
共和党联邦参议员里克斯科特
Senator Rick Scott, RFL.
办公室星期五在回复美国之音电邮中表示支持向中国隐瞒疫情而导致全球爆发流行病的行为进行问责。
The office of Republican Senator Rick Scott RFL said Friday in an email response to VOA that it supports holding China accountable for covering up the outbreak that led to the global pandemic.
资料照，共和党联邦参议员斯科特
Senator Rick Scott, RFL.
出席参议院听证会。资料照，共和党联邦参议员斯科特
Senator Rick Scott, RFL.
出席参议院听证会。
File photo, Republican Senator Scott RFL attends a Senate hearing.
斯科特参议员希望共产中国为他们在制造这场全球流行病中所扮演的角色负责。斯科特参议员办公室在声明中说，中国不可信，也从未如实提供有关新冠病毒的关键信息。中国正在隐瞒信息，审查患者，并在病毒及其如何传播等问题上彻头彻尾的撒谎。
Senator Scott wants Communist China to take responsibility for its role in creating this global epidemic. Senator Scott's office said in a statement, China cannot be trusted and has never provided crucial information about the new coronavirus. China is withholding information, screening patients and lying through its teeth about the virus and how it spreads.
媒体不应该接受他们的数据是准确的。斯科特参议员将努力确保美国追究共产中国的责任。
The media should not accept that their data is accurate, and Senator Scott will work to ensure that the United States holds Communist China accountable.
民主党议员不同意。
The Democratic congressmen disagree.
不过，国会民主党人普遍批评特朗普总统和行政当局对于美国新冠病毒疫情的回应。
However, congressional Democrats were widely critical of President Donald Trump and the administration's response to the new coronavirus outbreak in the United States.
民主党联邦众议员吉姆·麦戈文
Republican Jim McGovern, DMA.
表示，他担忧共和党人在对中国采取调查的做法将引起种族歧视，甚至种族仇恨。他对此感到反感。
Republican Jim McGovern DMA, a Democrat, said he was concerned that the Republicancy investigation of China would lead to racial discrimination and even hatred. He resents it.
我认为，其中一些努力带着反对中国人民的色彩，让我很不舒服。麦戈文星期五在接受美国之音采访时称，我想说，中国政府没有实话实说。你也知道，我对中国政府的人权记录一直持批评态度，但如今不是找替罪羊的时候，现在是我们在国际上共同努力的时候。这是世界性的危机，我们需要让中国更加合作，我们需要与世界其他国家合作，所以我认为这样做现在时机不合适。
I don't think I'm comfortable with some of these efforts being anti-Chinese, McGovern said in an interview with VOA on Friday. I would say that the Chinese government is not telling the truth. As you know, I have always been critical of the Chinese government's human rights record. But now is not the time for a scapegoat. Now is the time for us to work together internationally. This is a worldwide crisis. We need to make China more cooperative. We need to work with the rest of the world. So I don't think this is the right time.
共和党众议员出身的蓬佩奥国务卿星期三在谴责中共对人民健康和生活方式构成严重威胁时，被记者问到国会试图追究北京责任的努力。蓬佩奥当时说，这件事由国会自己决定，但他认为眼下不是追责的时候。
The Republican Congressman, Secretary of State Pompeo, was asked Wednesday by reporters about congressional efforts to hold Beijing accountable when she accused the Communist Party of posing a serious threat to people's health and lifestyles. Pompeo said at the time that it was up to Congress to decide the matter, but he did not think it was the right time to press charges.
但是，会有合适的时候的。他接着说，在我们设法解决了这场危机之后，在我们设法让每个经济体重新站稳脚跟之后，会有时候让世界来对所发生的事情评估责任。
But there will come a time, he continued, after we have managed to resolve this crisis, after we have managed to put each economy back on its feet, there will be times when the world will be asked to take responsibility for what has happened.
美国总统特朗普美国时间星期四夜晚与中国国家主席习近平通了电话。特朗普说，两人交谈得很好。中国在抗疫方面有很多经验和知识，两国正在密切合作。
U.S. President Donald Trump spoke by phone Thursday night with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Donald Trump said the two men had a good conversation and that China had a lot of experience and knowledge in fighting the epidemic and the two countries were working closely together.
麦考尔，美中关系再也回不去了。
McCall, there is no going back to the U.S.-China relationship.
美中两国就新冠病毒的起源和传播责任上展开的外交争斗，同时令各界讨论，本已处于低潮的双边关系将如何发展。
The diplomatic battle between the United States and China over the origin and spread of the new coronavirus has also led to discussions about how the already tepid bilateral relationship will develop.
在特朗普与习近平进行了友好的电话交谈之后，作为众议院外交事务委员会共和党首席成员的麦考尔对美国之音表示，他不认为在这次疫情之后，美中关系还能回到从前。
After a friendly telephone conversation between Mr. Donald Trump and Mr. Xi, McCall, the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, told VOA he did not think that after the outbreak, the U.S.-China relationship can go back to the way it was.
我不认为美中关系未来还会一样。特朗普总统与习主席有特别的关系。我从贸易协议中看到了这一点。有意思的是，贸易协议达成的时候，刚好赶上中国疫情出现高潮。麦考尔说，不过，我确实认为我们要审视我们的供应链。我们80%的医疗物资供应来自于中国。如果我们在这样的危机时刻还必须依赖中国，当他们威胁我们，说要把我们置身于新冠病毒的地狱，拒绝提供医疗物资给我们，美国就必须重新审视，思考我们能否在美国制造这些产品。
I don't think US-China relations will be the same in the future. Mr. Donald Trump has a special relationship with Mr. Xi. I see this in trade agreements. It is interesting that the trade agreement was reached just in time for the Chinese epidemic to reach its climax, McCall said. But I do think we need to look at our supply chain, and 80% of our medical supplies come from China. If we have to rely on China in times of crisis, when they threaten to put us in a new coronavirus hell and deny us access to medical supplies, the United States will have to look again and think about whether we can make these products in the United States.
整个这段经历，就像是阴阳魔界的噩梦，将让美国人清醒地审视我们和中国之间的关系以及我们与中国的供应链。
The whole experience, like the Twilight Zone nightmare, will give Americans a sobering look at our relationship with China and our supply chain with China.